I had a father who, in his younger days, was very active, and he was also involved in the emergency. During the emergency, he went to many places and many secret places he found in the forest. And later, when everything was peaceful again and we were kids, he used to take us a lot into the forest. And I remember my youth as a kid of about 8 7 8 years old, running in the wilds of Tasik Bera, barefoot with orang asli kid. And when the military helicopter comes in, we are all running. And the first thing the doctor on board would do is throw soap and toothbrushes and toothpaste, wanting us all to go and get brushed up and clean before they come and visit him. And little did I know, uh, 10 years later, at the age of 20, I will become a banker. So I was Maybanking for a while, but 4.5 years later, I realized banking wasn't my cup of tea. And I didn't like Kuala Lumpur because of the traffic jam. 35 years ago, came to Langkawi and just immediately fell in love with this island. And I knew this was the place to put down root.
Irshad Mobarak, renowned naturalist, conservationist, book author, and founder of ecotourism operator Junglewala Langkawi in Malaysia. I'm Noelle Lim on ASEAN Speaks, Maybank Investment Banking Group. We take a break from our usual show about the markets to celebrate World Wetlands Day. In this special, we put the spotlight on mangroves, which are coastal wetlands that grow in the tropical and subtropical areas. So did mangroves start life in Langkawi?
This is a very contentious subject. It's been suggested that mangroves evolved some 80 to 85 million years ago. The earliest fossilized records of mangroves can be found in the Yucatan Peninsula. That might be so, but on the other side, there are another school of thought, another school of scientists that claim that the origin story of mangroves may well have been here in Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia is the laboratory for evolutionary processes. It's an area of thousands of islands. Indonesia alone have well over 17,000 islands. Philippines, 7,000 islands. Malaysia is full of islands. So the rise and fall of the oceans, the connection, and again the disconnection of these islands provided the greatest condition for evolutionary processes to happen. So it is here in Southeast Asia that we have the greatest diversity of mangroves on the planet.
How do mangroves inform us of our past?
Well, mangroves is an ongoing, continuous evolutionary adaptation process. You have to really go deep into the soils to understand, into the mud of these mangroves, to understand its past. And this past is written in the layers and layers of mud beneath it. So for example, we believe that the first such plant to thrive in such a mangrove environment, the fossilized record tell us it might be nipa, the nipa palm. That's the oldest record of such a plant, an estuary plant in a tidal environment. And I've seen some amazing things traveling up rivers, not only in Langkawi, but even along rivers in Sedili. Just 5 days ago, I went to a place called Sedili, and it's wetlands, right? So I went through a transition from mangroves, mostly rhizophora, and then it transitioned to a new type of forest, the nipa forest, that eventually thin out to a third type of forest, which we call dominated by Barringtonia trees. And finally, we ended up in an environment higher upriver, that was mostly made up of pandanus. So in the wetlands, a wonderful transition into 4 different belts. So you can tell the history of going up a river, but the real history of what was the past, you got to go into the mud to understand the different strata, to search evidence of the history.
Supported by a dense network of roots, the trees and vegetations in mangroves are partially submerged in water, providing a habitat for thousands of marine species like crabs and fish, and attracting shorebirds and migratory birds to take cover. Consequently, mangroves are a source of livelihood for coastal communities while helping stabilize the shoreline and prevent erosion. Their fascinating ecosystem, appearing to live in a world of their own, is actually very much interconnected with our lives in the mainland, as they keep seawater from encroaching on inland waterways, reducing the impact of floods and tsunamis. Some scientists and academicians have devoted their careers to studying mangroves. One of them is Dr. Aldrie Amir, who has published papers and written articles. He is the head of the Environmental, Economic and Social Sustainability Research Centre under LESTARI at University Kebangsaan Malaysia, or UKM.
I was a student at the Faculty of Environmental Science at UKM. I was writing my honours thesis when I discovered like this habitat, this ecosystem was not properly studied or not comprehensively studied at that time. And somehow the uniqueness, like all the characteristics, like the root systems, like they have this unique characteristic that really attracted me. And so I felt like, so attached. And yeah, that was a start. And then for my PhD, I actually studied like a more unique thing about mangrove, where lightning strikes, disturbance, for example, that create canopy gaps within the mangrove. And that actually drives for natural regeneration in mangrove forest. So yeah, since then, I think during the undergraduate study until my PhD, I pledged my eternal love towards mangrove.
Well, they play an important role in mitigating the effects of climate change as carbon sinks, meaning they suck up carbon dioxide from the air to store in their branches and roots deep into the soil below water for thousands of years. While mangroves only account for a small percentage of total land mass in the world, they punch above their weight in absorbing carbon.
Of the whole global landmass. So they are very small, they are very little. But then within this 1 to 2% of global landmass, their ability to absorb and sequester carbon are 3 to 5 times higher than other tropical forests. It depends on different types of habitat and ecosystems. Some say up to 10 times higher compared to other types of habitats and ecosystems on Earth.
Why are they such effective carbon absorbers?
Yeah, because of the extreme condition of the environment in the intertidal zone, they have to work very hard to absorb carbon dioxide. So that turns into a fast rate of absorption. That's one. Dead leaves, or leaf litter coming from these trees, don't just fall on the ground. They are actually being kept in the soil for many hundreds and thousands and millions of years. This is a result of co-working in between other creatures as well. So the leaves, the fallen leaf contains like a solid or pure carbon, and these leaves are being fed by crabs, for example. So they eat on the ground, and then many of them will carry the leaf into their burrows, into their holes. And these leaves are being kept, being patched onto the walls, and the whole solid carbon stays in the sediment, in the soil for many million years. So comparing to terrestrial forests, these leaves, these organic for bacterial activity, to turn it into organic material, organic carbon, and kept on the topsoil. But in mangrove, this carbon goes straight into the sediment. So this is one way of them regulating carbon in the habitat and ecosystem.
How is Malaysia doing in terms of protecting and restoring its mangroves?
There was plenty of research estimating the amount of loss, and many of them recorded 50% of the original mangroves in around 1980. actually a deep plunge of the amount of mangrove forest reserve in the last century. That we could see the numbers declining until 1990, until 2000s.
And then the tsunami happened in 2004 that killed over 200,000 people and caused massive damage in coastal areas of Sumatra, Thailand, northern parts of Malaysia like Langkawi and Penang, as well as Sri Lanka and the Maldives.
The 2004 tsunami actually sent a lot of signals, sent a lot of messages to the managers. Since 2005, a lot of restoration activities have been going on. A lot of mangrove forests are being gazetted, are being protected to be a forest reserve. So now, since the beginning of this century, the rate of loss has been dropped to like 0.1 to 0.2% a year. The latest survey done by our friends at Forest Research Institute of Malaysia record like 600 plus thousand hectares of mangrove in Malaysia, but about 500,000 hectares are being protected at the moment. So there are about 100,000 hectares that are still a forested ecosystem, but they are not protected legally.
While great effort has been taken to preserve mangroves, they continue to come under stress due to tidal action and clearing of land for agriculture and economic development.
Yeah, so with the increasing sea level, with the stress coming from climate change, increase in sea level, so they will need space behind, I mean on the land, right, to move, to transition themselves when that happens. So now we have all this physical development on land that deter them from undergoing this dynamic process. So this is one stress that they have. So imagine also when sea level rises, they will be totally inundated, like permanently inundated, and that is not conducive anymore for mangrove. So they will die that way. Of course, the other stresses like increasing storms, increasing winds, increasing wave actions, and of course other pollution, man-made pollution like oil spills, for example. So yeah, that's coming from ocean, and the rest coming from land. So they are stuck in the middle. They have to tolerate both sides, right?
Then there is tourism. Irshad is concerned.
Tourism today is like a double-edged sword. Yeah, we saw an improvement when they stopped the production of charcoal, but now tourism itself has begun to pose a danger to it. There are, for example, in two very important rivers where tourists visit, Sungai Kilim and Sungai Itau, Tanjung Ru. There are well over 400, 500 boats that are plying these enclosed waterways, the meandering mangroves. And it's unregulated. The speed these boats go are unregulated. It's all voluntarily managed. So the speed they go in some of these waterways increases the size of the wake that erode the bank, that causes trees to fall over. So then the churning of the propellers, increases sedimentation. And when these sediments are carried out to the open sea, they settle on the corals. So ecotourism, unregulated, has impacted our natural environment. It's like it's affecting the fishing community. As you understand, coral reefs, if you may have heard, wonderful nursery for baby fish and baby prawns, and a wonderful place for crabs. So the loss of forests, of these mangrove forests, impacts the fishing community, along with the coral life outside that they also depend on. So in future, I see on the horizon a conflict between the tourism operators, boat operators, and the fishing community. This needs to be addressed as soon as possible.
What is the solution? What can the Malaysian government do? Have better enforcement?
You know, there's no silver bullet, one single silver bullet. This situation must be addressed in multiple fashions. So, first and foremost, no politician wants to be unpopular, but we need to see real leadership. If nothing is done, we will be killing that goose. But here are some of the things they should do. One, introduce minimum carrying capacities. That means regulating the number of tourists that visit these sites. That's most important. Encourage the use of solar and electric boats. They go they don't make so much noise, they don't release so much fumes, they don't put oil in the water. 3, regulate the speeds these boats are allowed to travel within these enclosed waterways. They can't be racing through with their heavy loads of tourists. Yeah. Then introduce best practices rules and to certify such operators. 5th, limiting the routes and alternating the routes so that the forest and its fauna can be allowed to recover in certain patches by alternating the routes. And introducing a small or nominal levy, a fee, a nature fee on each visitor. And this fee accumulated will be used for the protection and the rehabilitation of the mangroves. And 7, as you just said, enforcement of these regulations. And we need to see fines being issued for those that break these conservation rules.
Malaysia has on record over 600,000 hectares of mangroves, of which about 500,000 are being protected. Is that enough considering we used to have double the size? Audrey weighs in.
Good question. This triggers our research actually to identify the degraded mangrove areas. So in the 1980s, when the scientists at that time highlighted about the loss of 50% of the mangrove, so we need to know where the original location or the original expand of the mangrove, right? So this work is being carried out now, like to identify these degraded areas. So if 600,000 hectares of mangrove we currently have, there should be 1.2 million hectares, right? If 50% is the magic number here, so we have to identify and we have to expand it to that size.
How should we approach regeneration?
Totally protecting whatever existing mangrove that we have left. So I think that should be the first step that Malaysian government can do. So protect what we have left. And secondly, identify degraded mangrove, degraded coastal areas, study them properly, record them properly, and then plan for habitat restoration. So I think, and then again, restoration itself needs to be supported by scientific methods, input from scientists, input from academic, and then of course this must be, we must engage local communities to be part of these restoration activities, because they are there, they live there, they grow there, and they know their surroundings, and they will be the first beneficiary. Highlight here, like to restore mangrove, we have to do it right. First, it must be supported by a strong scientific input. Like for example, like on the coastline, we cannot plant them on beaches, we cannot plant them on seagrasses, we cannot plant them on coral reefs, right? Because these are all a habitat and ecosystem themselves, right? A unique habitat and ecosystem themselves. So what we can do now is to identify that suitable in intertidal areas in which they can accommodate mangrove properly. So we don't simply spend a lot of money. We don't simply get people together, purchase as many seedlings as possible and simply plant them everywhere. So it must be supported by scientific basis.
How can companies help?
What corporate organizations are doing at the moment is to support planting activities, for example. So this is where companies can do better. Like, for example, they don't just spend money to buy seedlings, for example, and to get people to get together and plant. So maybe they can spending or maybe supporting research funding first, like identifying this area, get to know this particular area of interest, do a feasibility study to understand if this area is suitable to be restored, because there will be issues like land tenure, for example, right? So we don't know who owns the land. So there were cases before, like people simply plant everywhere and then suddenly that area being bulldozed, right? Because it is already earmarked or planned for other type of development, either by state as the owner or maybe private owners. So that issue must be settled first, and then understanding the condition of the area, the physical characteristics, biological characteristic of the area. So maybe spend some money on that.
So we know that mangroves can store vast amounts of carbon and their regeneration can be a source of carbon credits, forming what we call blue carbon stock. Singapore has started Climate Impact Acts, a global exchange and marketplace to trade such carbon credits among others. But what are Audrey's thoughts about having a mechanism in Malaysia to produce credits?
Policies would be important. It must be supported by strong legal tools, right? For example, like acts, for at federal level, we need the federal government to come up with a strong act to facilitate this effort. And then it again, as land is a state matter in Malaysia, it must be supported by state enactments or ordinance, right? To facilitate carbon credit mechanism. And as we know, at the moment we don't have that.
Irshad is circumspect and cautions against over-relying on carbon offsets.
Two sides to the argument. Carbon credits can be an excuse for some companies that are polluting companies to continue to pollute, but to pay for carbon credits so that they can continue to pollute. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. But it has to be a genuine effort, and I can speak of a wonderful hotel that I'm involved with. It's called the Datai, and the Datai is making genuine efforts to reduce their carbon output by changing within, by putting less waste into the landfill, with almost zero waste at the Datai. Everything is upcycled, recycled. Our wastes are separated. We have a place where green waste goes back into a little farm. We have a permaculture garden called the garden. And we use it, utilizing it by going even one step further by coming up with a program called the Datai Pledge, where we also are doing efforts to conserve the rainforests by creating wildlife corridors within the island that animals can cross to different core ecological zones. We also in the sea by building fish aggregating devices for the local fishing community to fish at, so they leave the natural corals alone, and then we would rehabilitate that the natural corals. So it has to be a genuine effort to reduce your carbon. You can't just think it's an easy solution. We can continue to pollute and we just buy credits. It's helpful for poor nations to protect their rainforests, but that's not going to stop the amount of carbon in the atmosphere, really.
Mangroves are the silent superheroes in our modern world as they protect us from shore erosion and floods. How worried should we be when they all dry up, die off, and disappear?
Yes, mangroves are. I have a book, and the chapter is called "The Kings of Adaptability," and to me, mangroves are the epitome of adaptability. So they will survive long after we've gone. They will survive. They will adapt to these conditions of oceans rise. They just move a little bit deeper. Yeah, so eventually we cannot fight nature. Nature is stronger. Nature will adapt. The question is, will we change? Will we adapt?